Since the game's launch, Payday 3's Armour system has remained one of the most divisive and hotly contested topics about the game. There's a lot of people who have very strong feelings about the system on both sides, with some people having a vitriolic hatred towards it, confused as to why Starbreeze would try and fix something that, in their eyes, wasn't broken, and on the flip side, some people are willing to defend the system to their dying breaths, praising Starbreeze for changing up the gameplay loop of the series and doing something new with it. Recently though, I've finished up my year at college, and with no coursework to do and still trying to find myself a job, I've had a lot of free time to work with. Much like you'd expect anyone to do so, I've been using a lot of that time to play video games, and I've been playing a ton of them. I've gone back into playing Guitar Hero, replayed New Vegas and put an almost concerning amount of playtime into a single save file, replayed the Halo campaigns on Legendary, and hell, I even played a few rounds of TF2 for old time's sake with some friends. Strangely enough though, I've been playing very little of Payday 3. Outside of playing Boys in Blue when it dropped and getting background footage, I've hardly been touching the game. Ever since I started playing the Payday games back in 2020, my summers were dominated by them. As sad as it sounds, my life was quite literally eat, sleep, Payday, repeat. Of course, since I've gotten a little bit older and at least think I've gotten a little bit more responsible with my time, I've had less of my time focused towards playing Payday and more towards other things. You know, like going outside and actually having a social life. Though I've never had such little playtime in the games and I've had this much free time available. So I genuinely sat down and thought, why am I not wanting to play Payday 3? You can attribute it to a whole range of things. Burnout with the series as I've been playing the games effectively non-stop for almost 4 years straight now, apathy for the series after the no man's land that's been Payday 3 after its launch, or just me suddenly deciding that maybe playing the funny games with the clowns robbing the banks isn't the best way for me to be spending my time. So I sat down and thought about it, and after a while I managed to pinpoint that a lot of my disappointment with the game and why I've been playing so little of it comes down to just one core feature of the game: the Armour system. I should clarify, there are definitely a lot of reasons why I'm not really wanting to play Payday 3 at the moment, but as we're entering this weird limbo state where the future of the game is still in the air, I figure it's worth giving my own 2 cents on something which I feel is bottlenecking mine, and I imagine many other people's enjoyment of the game. I figured the best way to really understand why Payday 3's ARM system still felt so unenjoyable was first look at other games, and look into them to see how their systems worked, what made them tick, and inversely, where they fell flat. For this, I decided to look at 3 games in particular: Left 4 Dead 2, Halo Reach, and Payday 2. Without further ado though, let's start by looking at Left 4 Dead 2. Being over 13 years old, Left 4 Dead 2 is still played by thousands of people daily, and is generally considered to be one of the best multiplayer PvE games of all time, so it should come as no surprise that its systems, and by extension, its gameplay as a whole is extremely satisfying and enjoyable. In Left 4 Dead, you only have pure health though, and there's actually no armor system in the game, so why am I looking at it exactly? Left 4 Dead 2 not having an armor system works for how the game plays, in that, in Left 4 Dead 2, you're fighting the Infected. The Infected can only attack you once you're in melee range of them. Exceptions do exist in some of the special Infected who can hit you from range, however they're given the pretty large caveat of that their ranged attacks are pretty heavily telegraphed and are also projectiles with travel time, allowing you to dodge and avoid them pretty easily. Once you take damage though, you can use medkits to heal back up or use adrenaline or pills to give yourself a temporary increase to your health which will slowly fade over time. This system is pretty good, as while you're punished pretty heavily for taking damage as you can't regenerate health without using up consumables, all of the damage you take is technically preventable, making it dependent on player skill more than anything else. There's a bit of an exception with friendly fire, but even then you can avoid that by learning how to position yourself correctly when your teammates are shooting. Now, let's look at Halo Reach. Halo Reach might seem like a bit of a weird choice, but I really think it's worth analysing when looking at armor and health systems. Despite the series' success and popularity from the game's multiplayer PvP modes, the PvE campaigns are incredible and very well designed, acting as great games to look at and analyse. Out of all of the Halo games though, why Reach in particular? Well, I have a few reasons. Personal bias because it's my favourite Halo game, but generally because I believe it's the best armor system out of all of the games. In Halo Reach, you have armor called shields, and you also have health. You first take damage to your shields, and once you use all your shields, you start to take damage to your health. Then, if you avoid getting shot at for a few seconds, you start to regenerate your shields, as well as a bit of your health, depending on how much of it you lost. Outside of just regenerating small bits of your health, you can then also use health kits to fully restore it. In Halo Reach, you're going to be fighting against the Covenant who have guns. Some of them shoot fast-moving projectiles that are basically impossible to dodge, but there are a few exceptions. This is a great system, but I personally feel it's a little bit too forgiving. It works well because with your shields, you're given this brief period of time where you can take shots and play aggressively as you won't be losing any permanent health. I can't stress just how good of a system this is. It manages to not slow the game down to a snail's pace, as if you're able to kill enemies quickly, you can actually go through entire combat encounters without having to go back into cover and let your armor regenerate. Though, even when I was playing the campaign on Legendary, the game's highest difficulty, there were a few times where I'd lose all my shields and take a few hits after playing a bit too aggressively, but because I didn't lose too much of my health, I was actually able to regenerate all of it back, and it just felt like I was getting off scot-free. Of course though, it's a system meant to still be enjoyable by players at all levels of play, so I'm actually quite willing to accept that some mistakes will be forgiven purely to accommodate for people who are new to, or just generally unskilled at shooter games. It's very much a low skill system, allowing for anyone to quickly understand how the game's combat works and be able to use it effectively and have fun with it. Lastly, we of course have to look at Payday 2. Payday 2 is easily the most important game to be looking at when analysing armor systems in games when talking about Payday 3's system, as it's what came before it, and made the series so successful and so popular. Payday 2's armor system is fairly similar to that of Halo Reach's, but differs in a few ways. You first take damage to your armor, then once it breaks, you start to take damage to your health. Then, if you avoid getting shot at for a few seconds, you start to regenerate your armor. It differs of course in that you can't regenerate any amount of your health. Well, at least without the assistance of Hostage Taker or some of the perk decks that allow you to do so. Outside of regenerating health using Hostage Taker and perk decks, you can use medic bags and first aid kits to fully restore your health. Payday 2 is also different in that every enemy in the game is hit scan, meaning that you can't dodge shots from the cops. Hi, Editor Cookie here. When I say that you can't dodge bullets, I mean as in you can't run to avoid them. There's dodge chance, but you can't outmaneuver bullets. Okay, alright, good, let's carry on then. Similarly to Halo Reach, this is an incredibly good system. It's easy for new players to understand how it works, and if you're skilled enough at the game, you can go through entire combat encounters without having to go into cover to let your armor regenerate. The issue I had with Halo Reach's system was the health regeneration, but I think Payday 2 hits a nice middle ground between being forgiving on armor, allowing for it to be infinitely regenerated, but still punishing you by making health unable to be regenerated without the usage of Hostage Taker mechanics in some perk decks, but still manages to keep it scarce and valuable. A massive difference between Payday 2 and Halo Reach though is just how many different things there are that can affect how the system plays. Firstly, you have different armor types, which can change how much armor you have, and by extension, how much damage you can take before your armor breaks. There's also perk decks, which can affect how much armor you have, how quickly you regenerate your armor, and how you gain your armor, as well as change how your armor plays in a few different ways too. Then you also have skills. Some skills can affect how much armor you have, like Die Hard and Iron Man, your armor's regeneration speed like Resilience and Shock and Awe, and then there's Bullseye. Armor gating is a mechanic in Payday 2 where as long as you have any amount of armor up, you can't take any health damage whenever you get shot, unless you get shot by a sniper. Since Bullseye gives you armor upon headshotting, it can give you a small amount of armor to armor gate with and continue to play aggressively for a little bit longer, granted that you're able to take your headshots, of course. This allows for quite a high skill ceiling on Payday 2's armor system, as with Bullseye and perk decks like Anarchist, Sociopath and Biker letting you be able to regenerate armor simply by dealing damage or making kills, you can let yourself live and play aggressively for much longer purely because you've learned mechanical skills of the game in a very high risk, high reward playstyle. I think Payday 2's armor system is incredible, having a low skill floor but having an insanely high skill ceiling with it, allowing for some crazy plays to be made if you've got the skills and game knowledge for them, punishing mistakes fairly, all while it manages to not exclude lesser skilled players from being able to enjoy the system, and by extension, the game as a whole. After looking at all these other games, we now of course have to look at Payday 3 and its armor system. Payday 3's armor system differs pretty heavily from its predecessor. You still take damage to your armor first, then once it breaks, you start to take damage to your health. However, it changes in a pretty significant way with the addition of armor chunks. Depending on what armor you pick, you'll have different amounts of armor chunks, all of which are able to take the same amount of damage before they break, with the exception of the adaptive armor, but that's something I'll talk about in more detail in a bit. When you take damage to these chunks though, you'll permanently lose some of the armor in the chunk, and the rest is able to be regenerated if you avoid being shot at for a few seconds, or activate the plate up skill. If you have permanent damage dealt to your armor chunk, you can then use an armor repair kit in order to restore it. Then, once you lose a chunk of armor, it's gone, and you can't regenerate it. To get chunks of armor back, you either have to use armor repair kits, or clean slates use an armor repair kit to restore a single armor chunk if you have no chunks of armor left. There's also the adaptive armor. Its armor chunks are weaker than the normal armor types, but they have the trade-off of that they don't take any permanent damage, allowing you to regenerate any and all of the damage you take to your chunk, given that it doesn't fully break. Health stays the same though, not being able to be naturally regenerated, but being able to be restored using deployables and with the skill, Assassin's Metal. This is a system I have a lot of thoughts on, and while I respect Starbreeze's intentions of creating a war of attrition design for the armor system, sadly the design and execution of it is a lot more important. The funniest thing about it is that it's such a flawed system that practically every element of it can be criticised, so I'm not entirely sure where to start, so I'm just going to be pretty blunt about this and just say it. The system is really stupid. I think the most obvious place to start though is that the system just misunderstands why armor or shield mechanics exist in these types of games to begin with. Give you a brief time window where you can play aggressively and attack enemies, and I'm putting a pretty heavy emphasis on it being brief. In Payday 2, if you play too aggressively, you're going to be punished by having your armor break and you start to take health damage, and you have to wait for it to regenerate via hostage taker, use your perk deck to regenerate the health, or use up a first aid kit or a medic bag. Payday 3, however, punishes players for making the mistake of existing and getting shot at, regardless of how aggressive they were playing. This is just poor design, as it makes playing the game at a low skill level feel frustrating, as your inevitable numerous mistakes will be punished incredibly hard, and it will be flat out annoying at higher levels, as there's little you can actually do outside of just shooting the cops first, which is something not always possible for a myriad of potential reasons. Left 4 Dead 2 punish you for not being able to clear out the infected, Payday 2 and Halo Reach punish you for playing too aggressively, but Payday 3 just seems like it wants to punish you for the sake of punishing you, like one of those annoying teachers you'd have in school. There's also a level of don't fix what isn't broken to the system. Games have had to change and evolve to stay interesting. People have been aware of this for decades. Halo 2 added akimbo weapons, Guitar Hero World Tour added full band support, and hell, Payday 2 added skills, power decks, armor types, weapon mods, pre-planning, stealth, multiple day highs, vehicles, weapon skins, outfits, and a very questionable storyline in order to try and push their respective series forwards. Payday 3 just seems to like change for the sake of change, not changing it so it can try and add something purely because it looks cool, not changing it so it can try and compete with rivaling games, not changing it so it can try and make the experience more fun for the player, changing it just so they can say, hey, this is different from the old game, you should play it because it's new. In my thousands of hours playing Payday 2, I saw hardly any criticisms of the armor system, mostly just being that armor gating was a bit silly at high levels of play, but for Payday 3 though, I've seen the complete opposite. I think for every person I've seen who enjoys the system, and I mean enjoys it, as in liking it, not just tolerating it, there's about a couple hundred or so people who dislike it. As time has gone on though, Starbreeze has taken some of the criticism of the system and made some changes, as well as introducing some new additions to the game. It's worth noting that the core of how the armor system plays has never been changed. There's been no major reworks, no adjustments to permanent damage, nothing, and it's all been quick fixes in the form of skills or the addition of the adaptive armor and fortitude. Funnily enough, the first change to the armor system came with a nerf to the armor up skill. Originally a skill would just flat out give you 2 chunks per usage of an armor bag, but got changed to just letting you also restore your current armor chunk alongside getting a full chunk of armor. You could still get roughly 2 chunks per usage, but it just made it slightly more cumbersome to do so, which was definitely a confusing move given that players were still adapting to the new armor system. We then saw armor repair kits being rolled out, being able to be received from hostage trades, dropped by dozers and techies when they're killed, and found in certain spawn locations on maps. We then also got the addition of Clean Slate, which allowed players to restore a single chunk of armor when they used an armor repair kit if they had no armor chunks left. While not being a direct change to armor, the addition of armor repair kits alongside the buffing of hostage trading skills let players be able to receive an absurd amount of armor repair kits, turning the once scarce resource into an absolute joke. This is one of my major issues with this war of attrition armor system, and that it's very hard to get into a Goldilocks state, and where armor is scarce enough that heists feel like they have to be completed as soon as possible, else you run the risk of running out of armor and dying, but also not too scarce that the game just feels frustrating. Starbreeze were just unable to hit this sweet spot for players, leading to a lot of people feeling frustrated by it when it was scarcer, and now a lot of people feeling bored by it with how easy it is to drown in resources. I imagine that it's a genuinely interesting system when it's pulled off properly, but that's the issue, when it's pulled off properly, and it seems that Starbreeze just can't do it. Then we got the addition of the adaptive armor, and it really changed things up. With the adaptive armor, you had 2 chunks of armor that couldn't take any permanent damage, or that the trade-off of that the chunks would break more easily. What's interesting to note is the armor's interaction with the plate-up skill, as with the activation of the skill regenerating your armor chunk instantly, and with the adaptive armor having all of its armor be able to be regenerated, this means that you can restore an entire chunk of the armor by making a single ammo pickup. Yep, it's as dumb as it sounds, and yes, it is as OP as it sounds. Fortitude was then also added to the game, and while not actually changing how armor was played and was instead just added as an alternative to armor as a whole, it's worth mentioning just because of how many people played and continue to play with it. The adaptive armor and fortitude being the game's most popular options really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. After all, the second you introduce something that isn't frustrating and overly punishing for the average player, people are going to flock to it. While they're strong additions to the game, the main thing that a lot of players will latch onto is that they're fun. There's none of the annoyance that the original armors bring with them, and they even allow for high levels of skill expression with them. Adaptive armor and plate up allowing for some crazy aggressive levels of play, and Fortitude and Assassin's Metal letting players sustain themselves for long periods of time if they're able to just keep making kills. Sadly though, the adaptive armor and fortitude, as fun as they are to play with, are not the be-all and end-all solutions to the armor system as it currently stands. The adaptive armor still has some of the annoying parts of the traditional armors, where if you lose a chunk, those chunks are gone until you use up an armor bag or armor repair kit if it was your last chunk and you've got clean slate, and well, fortitude isn't even an addition to armor, it's just an alternative to it as a whole. As the saying goes, you can put lipstick on a pig, but at the end of the day, it's still a pig. You can add skills that buff armor repair kits, give you more armor repair kits, and have chunks that can't take permanent damage, but at the end of the day, the traditional armors will still generally be considered unfun to play with, and the fundamentals of the chunk system will still have its frustrating moments. At some point, Starbreeze should realise that no matter how many things they add onto the system, it won't make people start to enjoy it. It'll only make people start to tolerate it just because it gets easier to play with. The armor system is most certainly not a priority for Starbreeze at the moment. In fact, I believe the exact opposite, as I figure that after they added the adaptive armor and fortitude, they now see the system as being fixed. Payday 3's got a lot of its work cut out for it at the moment, adding more content, finishing up solo mode, UI overhauls and a lot of other things as part of Operation Medic Bag, which I think are rightfully taking priority at the moment. After Operation Medic Bag though, I really do think a proper full-on re-evaluation of the game's current armor system would do wonders for the game going forward. After all, a new player is really going to want to get invested into this game that has one of its core systems, and by extension, the gameplay as a whole feel annoying and frustrating to engage with, especially at lower skill levels. As for what I think the armor system should look like, I don't entirely know. I'm not a game designer, I'm just someone who cares a little bit too much about video games. I've spoken the praises of the systems in Halo Reach and Payday 2, but a direct implementation of that type of system just wouldn't work for Payday 3 in its current state, and it's a rough spot for Starbreeze to be in, given they have no real easy way out of it, but they have definitely dug their own grave on this front. That's about it though. This video took me a pretty long time to make, as there was a lot of writing and small adjustments I had to make for the script, a lot of footage I had to record, and a lot of editing I had to do. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Yeah, I know it's the usual cliche thing for YouTubers to say, but it really does help and it lets my stuff get seen by more people. If you did enjoy the video though, I'm not really too sure what to tell you. Maybe leave a comment saying about what you didn't like or, you know, where you disagreed with me. I mean, you stuck around until the very end, so I at least appreciate the dedication on that front. As usual though, I've been Cookie Dough, and have a good one.